Good morning, everybody. It's Monday morning, and welcome to Penn Vicarage. Lovely to see you. Hope you've had a lovely weekend. Thank you for joining us this morning for our Bible talk for today, and I hope you find it helpful as we continue our adventure through the Psalms. Today is Psalm 139, one of the best known and an absolute beautiful psalm, this one. And so, without further ado, we'll get stuck into it. Psalm 139, a psalm of David. O Lord, you've searched me and known me. You know when I sit down and when I rise up. You discern my thoughts from afar. You search out my path and my lying down, and are acquainted with all my ways. Even before a word is on my tongue, O Lord, you know it completely. You hem me in behind and before, and lay your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It's so high that I cannot attain it. Where can I go from your spirit? Or where can I flee from your presence? If I ascend to heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in Sheol, you are there. If I take the wings of the morning and set them the farthest limits of the sea, even there your hand shall lead me, and your right hand shall hold me fast. If I say, surely the darkness shall cover me, and the light around me become night, even the darkness is not dark to you, the night is as bright as the day, for darkness is as light to you. For it was you who formed my inward parts. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works, that I know very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was being made in secret, intricately woven in the depths of the earth. Your eyes beheld my unformed substance. In your book were written all the days that were formed of me, when none of them as yet existed. How weighty to me are your thoughts, O God! How vast is the sum of them! I try to count them, they are more than the sand. I come to an end, I am still with you. Oh, that you'd kill the wicked, O God, and that the bloodthirsty would depart from me. Those who speak of you maliciously and lift themselves up against you for evil. Do I not hate those who hate you, O Lord? Do I not loathe those who rise up against you? I hate them with perfect hatred. I count them my enemies. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me and know my thoughts. See if there's any wicked way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. And this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Absolutely gorgeous song, this one. There's some absolutely some lovely stuff in there. It's fantastic. The context, I think, is quite interesting. It's a psalm of David. And I think the context here is that he's come up against some bloodthirsty baddies, basically, who are falsely accusing him, who are standing against God and God's will and so on. And I think what David is doing here is, as you can see in the sort of verses 19 to 22, you kind of see this really. And that David obviously feels very, very strongly about it. And that there are people who have risen up against him, who are bloodthirsty, who are accusing him of bad stuff. And therefore he's saying, the thrust of the psalm is saying, God, you know what's really going on. And so with that in mind, the psalm basically fits into various sections. So verses 1 to 6 is about God being all-knowing. Verses 7 to 12 is about God being everywhere. Verses 13 to 18 is that God is always everywhere. Verses 19 to 22 are what David thinks he wants God to do with his enemies. And then verses 22 to 23 at the end, he kind of tails it off at the end with a kind of final prayer that God would search him out as well. So we get these sections, as I say, verses 1 to 6 is God knows everything. Verses 7 to 12, we have that God is everywhere. We have verses 12 to 18 saying that God is always everywhere. And then then 19 to 22 is what he wants to do with the enemies. And what 22 to 23 at the end is the kind of final prayer. So take one at a time. So verses 1 to 6 is that God is all-knowing. And the language used by David in the psalm is stunning, and it's beautifully poetic. You know when I rise up. You know my thoughts. You search out my path and my lying down. You're acquainted with all my ways. Because God knows him intimately. It reminds me of when Jesus says that God has counted every hair in our head, that God knows everything, and that God's knowledge is so much greater than our knowledge. And sure, there are for all of us times that we don't understand, and things that happen that we just don't get. But actually, what he's saying here is that God's knowledge is so much greater than ours. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It's so high that I cannot attain it. So verses 1 to 6 here, you have that God knows everything. And that God's knowledge is so much greater than our knowledge. Even before words on my tongue, O Lord, you know it completely. So here in verses 1 to 6, God's incredible knowledge, that God knows everything, and that God's thoughts are so much higher than as the heavens are high above the soil, my ways higher than your ways, says the Lord. It's a bit like that. And that's Psalm 103, of course. But you get here that God's knowledge is so much greater than ours. Then verses 7 to 12, you have that God is everywhere. And if I ascend to heaven, highest place you are there, who make my bed in Sheol, which is like, some people translate it as hell, but that's not really right. It's more like a kind of place, a shadowy place of the dead. It's meant to be down there somewhere. So if I go up, you're there. If I go down there, if I take the wings of the morning, go to the uttermost parts of the sea, even go to think as far as you can possibly go, you're there as well. Even there, your hand shall lead me, your right hand shall cover me fast. And in the light, in the darkness and in the light, even God is there too. The night is as bright as the day, darkness is as light to you. So wherever you go on this earth, God is there, and that you cannot escape from God, but that God's guiding, loving hand is there. However far we go, God knows. You can never run fast enough to outrun God, if you see what I mean. So wherever you go, up in heaven, down in Sheol, as far as rich as you can possibly get, even there, God is there too. So here in verses 7 to 12, that God is everywhere. Then in verses 13 to 18, then you have that God is always everywhere. So you get the time. So it was you that formed me in my inward parts. You knit me together in my mother's womb. So even before I was when I was a twinkle in my mother's eye, even there you were there too. So you were there at the beginning. So and God has always been there too. It's not just that God is there now, but God has always been there. And it's actually a beautiful thing, is that the language used is amazing. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. I don't always feel fearfully and wonderfully made if I'm beautifully made in God's image or something. I don't often feel like that. But actually, that's the way we are. God, you and I are not accidents. We are made the way we are. God has made us the way we are. Intricately woven. When I was being made in secret, intricately woven in the depths of the earth. So even it's a lovely thought that God has intricately put us together. And we, you held my unformed substance in your book. So when none of them exist as it existed. So just hear the fact that God has always been there, and therefore God always will be. So far we've got that God's knowledge is far greater than ours, 1 to 6. 7 to 12, that God is everywhere. 13 to 18 is that God has always been there, for therefore will continue to be so. Then we get to the tricky bit, which is 19 to 22, which is how David feels. And he feels very strongly about these people. And he uses a string now. Oh, that the bloodthirst would depart from me. I hate them with perfect hatred. The old Prebet version has, I hate them right sore. But notice here, interesting, is, oh, that you would kill the wicked of God. Notice he's not doing it himself. He's giving it over to God. David trusts God, because God knows everything, because God is everywhere, because God has always been there. He's not doing it himself, but he's trusting God to do it for him. And I guess, again, like I said to you when we talked about Psalm 137 a couple of days ago, David's honest with God, and actually he's right that you express his feeling. God knows how we feel anyway, so David expresses that feeling, that he trusts God to deal with it. That's interesting too. But it's also, I think the other thing I want us to hear from this is David's motivation here isn't actually one of vengeance. David's motivation here really is one of zeal. He's zealous for God. And because he's zealous for God, because he wants God's will to happen, he gets frustrated when other people stand against that. So I do believe, even these words are quite strong in verses 19 to 22. I think David's prime motivation here is one that he's zealous for God rather than being bloodthirsty as such. So I hate them. Do I not hate those who hate you, O Lord? So I think his motivation here is one of love for God rather than vengeance for its own sake. But also in verses 23 and 24, he tells it off at the end with, search me out, O God, and know my hearts. Test me and know my thoughts. See if there's any wicked way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. David's acknowledging the fact that, David has despite the boldness of what he's just said, David has the humility to say, Lord, where I get it wrong, don't let, keep me straight, If there are things in my life that aren't right, please point them out, Who was it? Was it a guy called Calvin who once said years ago, I beseech thee from the bowels of my innermost being to consider that thou mayest be mistaken. This is a lovely one. So actually, David acknowledges he hasn't got everything right. And so he says, search me out, O God, and know my heart. So David's in the situation. I believe he's got these people falsely accusing him of stuff, and he trusts to God because he knows God. Firstly, that God's thoughts are much greater than ours. Secondly, that God is everywhere. Thirdly, that God has always been everywhere. Fourthly, that he actually trusts his feelings and expresses his feelings about the accusers to God. But finally, he has the humility at the end to say, Lord, where I do get it wrong, please keep me straight, keep me on the right marrow and lead me in the way everlasting. It's a beautiful psalm. Read it again. There's a poetry in there. It's stunning. There's some gorgeous words in there. Psalm 139. I hope you find that helpful. God bless you, my friends. Have a lovely day.